Get up, everybody, get off your ass. We got to do something, and we got to do it fast. Cause the people are hungry, starving, and the fuel is low. Don't wait for Jesus, he ain't coming back no more. Got to sacrifice, have no fear, shed no blood, no, shed no tears. We gonna make our move, get out of our way. Cause we've been waiting way too long. We don't wait, we don't
Chicago, it's Katy, Hogan, and Michael James welcoming all our friends, our neighbors, our family, fellow comrades around the world to another edition of the Live from the Heartland show. We still call it Heartland at Home during the time of the pandemic. This is number 72 for the week of October 9th. And today we're going to have two really wonderful guests, our friend Jason Graham from up in the Northwest and our friend Tom Clark from over a little bit west here in Rogers Park. Good morning to you, Katy Hogan, and how are you doing today?
I'm fine, thank you. The good
Anything
thing
good happening you want to share?
the good thing that happened to me this week was for the first time, I visited something called the Anderson Japanese Garden in Rockford. I highly recommend it as a beautiful way to spend a couple hours. It's not huge distance to cover, but it's incredibly gorgeous and Zen-like. And the dining room attached to this place, excellent. So if you go, I highly recommend leaving room for lunch with your visit. It's just something I never knew about before. How about you? What's your good news this week?
Well, you know, I teach a course called Activists and Activism since 1960 at DePaul. And this week we went to the Chicago History Museum to have the students look at 1968 and what came down during that time. And after the class was over, I got to go up to the second floor and see the Vivian Mayer color photograph exhibit, which is really very wonderful. I recommend it very highly. We love her work. She was in Rogers Park a lot back in the day. And, you know, we saw a lot of her black and white, but now all of a sudden there's a whole bunch of color stuff and a big book that costs $80 with lots of color photographs. I put it off for a present, hopefully.
Oh, I'm just wondering, Michael, did you take the opportunity of showing your students the picture of you knocking over or not really knocking over a patio?
They never get it over. I keep telling everyone that.
I know, but did you or did you not show them that picture?
They already know that picture.
Oh,
Yeah, it's in the introduction of the class.
Okay.
Well, it was, and usually we go to Michigan and Balbo and we talk about that and up to the Logan Monument and, you know, get into it. But it was rainy yesterday. So we went to the History Museum. Used to be the Chicago Historical Society. Now it's the Chicago History Museum.
Okay, so on to the next stuff. People who need help or volunteer opportunities. I know that the Alderwoman's office in our ward is looking for folks who want to volunteer as after school accompaniment for the students leaving Gale School and getting them safely on their way home or to the L as they need to be, wherever they need to go. I'm definitely going to volunteer to do that. That was like the after school patrol that we did some 10, no more than that years ago from the other set of schools over at Pratt and Ashland when they would all get out. So anyone who's, you know, retired and has time on your hands and you want to accompany students after school at Gale Academy, contact Maria Haddon's office. Nationally, we're still holding our breath as we record this show. They did pass a debt ceiling lift, but we're still holding our breath on the Build Back Better and infrastructure votes. One of the main sticking points appears to be drug prices. If you're inclined, it's not a bad time to deliver a heartfelt and cuss-free message to your elected officials. Really, seriously, phone calls make a difference if you're giving a really heartfelt message, and try calling one of the Republican senators. We need them to get on board. Tell them it's time to save American democracy.
I think we should go after that Nebraska senator. I know his name is Sass, I think. He just seems like a guy that ought to be hit up regularly and maybe move a little bit to a better position. Just a
Yeah.
thought. I'll
Yeah.
try him. Katie,
Well,
what do you got on the environmental front?
Well, we mentioned the Glasgow climate summit that's happening in about a month. And in preparation for that summit, around the world, activists through 350.org and other groups are getting ready to organize creative actions to expose the greed and corruption of the fossil fuel industry. The message now is financial institutions need to stop funding climate crisis. Part of what I read on this that educated me, the Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell is ignoring the huge risk that investments in fossil fuels pose. Not only are they environmentally destructive, they're a financial risk to our entire economy, which, as Biden said in Michigan, I think this week, the future of cars is electric. So let's get on it, folks. Let's see. There's also an installation in the National Mall that illustrates the stakes of the climate crisis and the opportunities that bold climate action will bring. You could check it out online. The National Mall, I think it's called I can't remember the phrase, but climate change challenge is in those letters. I'm sorry, I can't remember it now. But on the National Mall, there's a climate power demonstration. What? Sorry.
No, I just said it happens, forgetting things.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. What else do you have, Michael?
One of the major influences and inspirations in my life was and still remains the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, who back in '64, lots of people went into Mississippi to work on voter registration. Lots more happened. SNCC has been around for a long time, and a lot of former SNCC workers helped to turn Georgia in the last election. Just pointing out that SNCC is marking its 60th anniversary with a virtual multi-generational conference this week. Starts Thursday, October 14th, runs through Saturday, October 16th. You should check it out. Speakers, panelists. It's at SNCC60thanniversary.org. That's SNCC 60th anniversary.org. And here in Cook County, our county, Tony Preckwinkle passed her $8 billion budget with no added taxes. But the Cook County Board of Commissioners voted to defer a resolution that would change Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day. The second time a vote on this issue has been delayed. We continue to encourage people whenever they're interacting with the Cook County Commissioners to push this issue. No offense to Columbus, he did some good things and bad things, but it should be called Indigenous Peoples Day.
Okay. The gap between the community and law enforcement was exacerbated again this week by a couple of happenings. The unuseful public back and forth between the mayor and our state's attorney, not useful, not a good thing to see.
Tell people what that was.
No, everybody knows. No, everybody knows.
Chicago they know, but they don't know nationally. We have listeners everywhere.
Well, it followed that with the just released video of police laughing while shooting rubber bullets at the Minnesota demonstrators a couple of years ago. I mean, really, we really need to double down and figure out how to be together, community and police. Here in Rogers Park, we're going to do more on this next week because the plaintiffs that we're part of from Rogers Park are intensifying their efforts.
All right, on the COVID front, one of the things that was going to be talked about was the vaccine mandates working. Biden's visit to Chicago this week was just to say that. It was a, chunk of time wasted for a flight for only an hour-long photo op. But I was reading about the vaccine mandates, and a number of members of the Republican Party, called the GOP, the Grand Old Party, are starting to switch parties in their allegiance over the vaccine mandate. The question of vaccine mandates and GOP governors' resistance has led to some public servants, office holders, leaving the party. Washington Post reports that Joy Hoffmeister, the Oklahoma State Secretary of Public Instruction, has switched parties and intends to challenge the sitting Republican governor named Kevin Stitt in a run for governor. In another case, up in New Hampshire, a state lawmaker has also switched parties. So we hope this is a new trend, and we encourage all you members of the GOP who have some principles and belief in democracy to switch parties. How's that? Well, let's just say you are listening to WLUW's Live from the Heartland on 88.7. Stay tuned. We're going to hear very shortly from our first guest out in Bend, Oregon, Jason Graham. We'll be right back with more Live from the Heartland.
We of the two or more gathered but semi-secular vein. Eagle eye up on raptors that circle amber wave prey. Keep an eye up on masters that tell you how you should pray. Tell you only one Jesus, well Jesus so many names. Do not label me a Christian, do not label me a victim. Phenotypic algorithms do not label me at all. Four-legged animals gotta go to the stops. We the type to keep moving up once we get to the top. We the type to keep moving up once we get to the top. We the type to keep moving up once we get to the top. We the type to keep moving up, type to keep moving up, type to keep moving up once we get to the Y like yelling. The land above monkeys, all eagles the brand, divided into two parties. Bodies comedians, the laughing key in my pocket before the lock to the zoo. Throwing feces at gawkers while rocking the monkey suit. Watching Lucas point fingers, I'm nigga chasing you chickens. I'm geeking out and I'm eating. We'll see the audience cringes, they're screaming, that is disgusting. I'm like, well, looky here, listen, see, one of us isn't hungry. In fact, you paid me to eat. Captivated, take a hold of wrinkled nose and you see. Only thing that's disgusting is that you want to be me. You could be up here.
Okay, welcome back to Live from the Heartland show. And we are really honored now to bring on our first guest, Jason McNeil Graham from Bend, Oregon. We just were hearing his tune, Get to the Top. We call Jason a very special guest because he's someone we've known since he was born. And as far as we know, he's the only person ever to be born in the Heartland building. So good morning to you. It's great to have you on. We've been talking about doing this for a while. Start off by telling us what tune we just heard and a little bit about your music.
Yeah, good morning. Good morning from the Heartland in Bend, Oregon. We were just listening to TTKM, Type to Keep Moving. That song was that was like a lyrical miracle favorite, right? So this track was like a lot of fun to write for word nerds, of which I consider myself. I was saying in another conversation that we play the show when we were playing shows live, which obviously we've taken a hiatus. When we were playing shows live, this one just soared in the studio and in the headphones and, you know, sitting around or whatever. But we play it live and people would just kind of stare at us. So we had like a mixed review, but this song is really about, it's got an element of transcendence in it. So once you reach whatever you think your peak is, how do you continue going from there? So to be some sort of mountain climber, you get to the top, blah, 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 problematic colonial flag in the top, whatever it is, but then to see a bird go past you and all the stages that we might continue to go. Once you get there, how do you fly now, for example, or on and on it goes. So
Jason, you've emerged as not just emerged, you are a powerful artistic presence in the Northwest. You were named the Creative Laureate of Bend, Oregon, the city's first. Tell us about what it's like to be the Creative Laureate and what you do with that title.
Yeah, I didn't know what to do with that title, like really at all. And it gave me a lot of pause. I got way into the Tao Te Ching for a little bit and thought a great deal about the power of the action of inaction, the choice of inaction. It was at an interesting cusp where I was realizing quite a few things about my community, realizing how I'd been representing my community, I was wondering what my community was. Bend, Oregon is an anti-slave, but an anti-Black state. So just to give you some sort of idea as to, which you probably know, but, or it's becoming more popular. Anyhow, that my relationship to the community as an other, for, there's been a variety of words that I've used, but that was really highlighted by that particular title in such a way that I felt it was either I was either a bit inept, or it would become dangerous potentially for me to speak sort of on behalf of a community I didn't necessarily feel that I was connected to as deeply as I needed to be to understand clearly how best to move forward. I understand that now that it's my tenure there is like kind of closing up, and we're going to bring somebody else on. But I encountered quite a few sort of survival tactics competing with wanting to speak up, and that's difficult when you find yourself on a lonely vanguard. It's difficult. But I'm grateful for it. I'm grateful for, and it's taught me a lot. I just didn't expect the timeline to be as such where as it's closing, I understand what to do now. And so now I'm feel like I'm really getting to work with it, but I also have some of that label no longer on me. So that's a diatribe, but.
So
yeah.
what do you do? What do you do in that role today?
Oh, well, really some of that was just showing up, finding out the lifelong lesson that you can show up as you are, that the work that I was already doing qualifies as good enough, that part of the work isn't about me at all, is about finding other folks in the community who need some sort of platform or advocacy. I did a lot of work in what I just called the underground, if you can call it here, but just away from the press or the limelight or the politicians who you would look good alongside, or all of that kind of stuff. I became very skeptical of immediately. And that was due to the fact that we had one of I believe it was the first woman of color to be brought into our city council. And as she was being brought in, she was replaced. And that seemed, the way in which she was replaced seemed deeply questionable to me, but I was allowed in. So now I was questioning that dynamic. So I'm good to work in the House, right? So if I'm good to work in the House, then what does that say about who I'm advocating for? Whether or not it went to that extent, I'm finding more and more that isn't paranoia. That's, I'm learning more and more all the time about things systemically that are in place in this way. So, but I feel like I went off I didn't answer.
You're doing great. You're doing great. I'm going to shift gears a little bit. And, I see your artistic work online, I think on Instagram, and it's really nice. So you're not just a musician, a poet, an activist, but you're also a serious graphic artist. Can you tell us a little about your paintings, the medium? What is your inspiration and what you are conveying?
Yeah. For sure. I did, Katie, I also noticed you put your hand up at one point, so I didn't know. Do you remember? Michael
just walks over me, I'll get to you. Go ahead, answer Michael's question.
If the feeling is mutual.
Yeah. I know there's a height difference here, but other than that, I've never actually known who really has the upper hand.
She does.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. Okay, that's what I was wondering. Painting wise, this is, I keep mentioning this, except I saw Duke Ellington giving an interview, and the guy said, where you get your ideas from? He goes, I got a million ideas. And he goes, I thought you played piano. It feels scripted. I don't believe it is. And he goes, no, man, I don't play piano. All I do is dream. And I love that. And so then he goes on to a riff and he's like, this is just dreaming. So if I can attach myself to Duke Ellington so I don't sound quite so vapid, this is all poetry. The painting is just poetry. It's just an extension of the poetry. The music is just poetry. Just talking politics is just poetry. Going in and out of it's all just the poetry. It's just it's figuring out how the beauty of the architecture of expression. Sometimes adding in more than you need. One thing I loved about the Heartland is that there were aspects to the building itself that didn't need to be there for a functional reason, but they were there for the aesthetic. There was a spiritual component to it, perhaps. There's a lot of other things, and sometimes the paintings become quite large that I do. So I also, to just pull from someone else, a friend of mine, Alex Reisbar, who lives in Portland, Oregon, who's a beautiful artist, he doesn't, as he was explaining his work to me, he has to discover sometimes what the work is about. So it's a non-linear timeline sometimes when you're working with paintings, because I'm pulling from like a pre-formal childlike aesthetic and similarly like a subconscious place, and then to find out later, oh, this is what this is about. So prior to, and how I got on the planet, my father, Daniel McNeil, prior to his passing last year, when he died last year, stuff was coming up in the paintings that after he died was it talking about the death. So that, call that whatever you like, but that is a real strong way for me to connect. It also allows me to not, the combination of what that says to me and having kids allows me not to back down too much on a price tag. Because if you look at my stuff, you're like, my child could do that. I'm like, your child didn't do it.
Good buck for him, I noticed. That's good.
Yeah. But it's like, when you start to see the value and the significance in that thing, the pricelessness of it, now all of a sudden, asking somebody asked me and they wouldn't give me a price. And I was like, $35,000. Like, I don't know. Like, if it's priceless, like, I don't know. Like, you tell me, So, but
that
it's
is
cool.
The trickiness. It's interesting. I hear, I just then heard in your cadence a little bit of Dan. And so I want to bring up Dan, because when he did pass last year, we noted that and talked about him on the radio show, because so many folks who know us and know Live from the Heartland also knew and loved Dan. And I'm so grateful that Michael and I, on a walk that we took at the start of the COVID lockdown, such as it was here, found ourselves walking by Dan's apartment, and we called him, and he came out, and we had a good 25-minute visit, which Michael actually captured a little bit of on video, which was amazing. And I know he probably shared that with you earlier. But what I have to observe is that you are in a very parallel or similar path to the one your father took.
That's right.
Storyteller, lyricist, poetry,
Yep.
the beat. I mean, Dan was so well known as the drummer of Rogers Park, period. He started more drum circles in his work and in his social life than anyone else. And what a great sharing spirit he was. Did you, before he passed, did you two share reflections on your similarities? On your similar path of sharing?
Yeah, I mean, that was something I was often noting and noticing. I remember sitting and watching a movie with him after not seeing him for a couple years, and we were hanging out, and like just the way that we sat and crossed our legs, and I was like, so it was at that level, it was very, I mean, I adored my father, so to be like him, intentionally or otherwise, is something that like I'm just all about. It's just some of the things that you were saying. I feel like there is similar maybe to the paintings or whatever. There is like an undeniable spirit that's like just in the family. So as he's passed and getting in touch with more folks, that's been fascinating. We've also got to have a lot of really, sorry, let me back up. It's fascinating to see the different places that this particular kind of creative energy emerges within this family, within my own kids. It was a huge part of our dialogue about how it does impact community, how it does change your world personally. And we had a lot of conversations about our similarities, about our recognizing we were there, I mean, sort of classic there in terms of you're always waiting to arrive, and it's like, no, at some point you have to show up and just recognize like, this is where I'm at and this is what I'm doing, and that is valid. He was really good about giving me advice, and sort of classically cliche, whatever. It wasn't always as good when I would like flip it back and be like, you're doing it, and then it was funny with him too, because sometimes he was so age defiant. So sometimes I'd be like, he just, and he was always in, great shape and all that stuff too. But I think he just didn't appreciate the construct of like, this is who you are based on this number any more than this is who you are based on this data point.
That's absolutely true. That's so true of him.
Yeah.
And you know, when we ran together, and I have one incredibly wonderful memory of running with Dan years ago, like a 10-mile run in snow, in a snowstorm with horizontal snow, running, you know, and he started chanting as we ran,
Yeah.
love strong, and which Michael then made into a t-shirt.
Well,
Yeah.
that was the first time I ever met Dan. He was at the Heartland. He had a handmade t-shirt that said "Love Strong." And I said, "What's
right.
that all about?" He
That's
says,
right.
"What do you want to know?" Or something like that.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
we became close
Exactly.
friends. And later we did put out a shirt that said "Love Strong."
Yeah.
Oh,
We should do it again.
Before we run out of time with Jason here, Michael, I wonder, would it be too interruptive to ask, do you have a poem you'd like to share with us, or some word
Right. Yeah.
music you'd like to share with us? We'd be happy to hear it.
Yeah.
We've
Absolutely.
got a few more minutes.
Well, you know, this is actually the first thing that came to me, I suppose, to kind of put a bow on it. It was some of the lyrics from the song, but it came from a conversation with my father, who like evolved through Catholicism, I guess you could say. You know, some people say the joke of recovering Catholic and all that. I think he evolved through it. But he would talk about the two or more gather, and you know, I wasn't raised in the church, but you know, open to spiritual practices through him in part. And so he would say that where two or more gather, if you can just get two folks together, you know, then something synergistic can happen. So the opening lines to that are, let's see if I remember. We of that two or more gather, but semi-secular vein. Eagle eye up on raptors that circle amber wave prey. Keep an eye up on masters that tell you how you should pray. Tell you only when Jesus, so many names. Do not label me a Christian. Do not label me a victim. Phenotypic algorithms do not label me at all. Tour-legged animals gotta go to the stops. We the type to keep moving up once we get to the top. And it goes on from there. But that's an excerpt.
Hey,
Excellent.
before we go out and bring on our next guest, do you have anything about the Northwest you'd like to share, be it fires, be it drought, be it the politics, the culture, any little riff you want to give us as we go out?
Yeah,
You're
man.
a hell of a guy, and we're really glad to have you on the show.
Oh, hey, first of all, I just want you to know, like, I was just talking to my mom about this. Carolyn Graham Sonetta, I was just talking with her about it last night. You know, but time doesn't do nothing to love. I just have so much love for the two of you. And I know I haven't gotten to see you for a minute, but it's so great to connect this way. I got to hang out with some cohorts. I just got, I'm one of 4 artists that made it into this thing called the Fields Fellowship. And the Fields Artist Fellowship. And so they set you up with an award that goes for 2 years. And meeting some folks inside of that cohort, there's a lady who is Northern Paiute. So some of the indigenous groups here, one of those is Northern Paiute, and talking about what's going on with the acquisition of water, what's going on with the manipulation of the wildfires, what's going on with the constant neglect of those who are perceived to be less than us because of a classist bullshit, So, but getting educated by these other artists as to how they move and maneuver and how they see what's going on in the state is being deeply informative. So as much as I want to, there was that, as much as I want to go off, there was that, listening to other folks who are in my state community, to what they're talking about and how we might come together. And then the other thing that we have to bring love and respect to is the young man who was murdered downtown Bend, Oregon, Barry Washington Jr. And that young man who recently came to our community to be safe is now being grieved and mourned and by all of us here. And the unfortunate impact of that, or the impact of that is catalyzing, hopefully, more than I think this town has ever seen before. And it's gone through a few stages recently of more than it's ever seen before. It is absolutely unreasonable, at the very least, to advertise this town as being such a safe and blue sky and everything's perfect kind of community when it is not taking care of its community members. And this was something that was easily avoidable, and it is something that is deeply reprehensible, and there needs to be a lot of space to grieve in this community, what has happened here, but not until we've really absorbed how something like this could happen in Paradise, right? So there's some big stuff going on. I feel really appreciative to be part of some organizations that are really doing some stuff and who also check me, just like if I was hanging out with you, I'd be waxing philosophical and talking all this stuff, and you'd be like, yeah, but a
little bit.
Jason,
look, we just scratched the surface. You just scratched the serious surface that we would love to delve deeper with you, but we do have a second guest in the waiting room.
Yes,
so
yes.
we're going to have you back from Paradise.
Okay.
For those of you who have never been to Bend, Oregon, it is in fact Paradise. My brother lived there for a while, and I visited him out there, and yeah, give Carolyn our love.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
The garden that your parents placed your placenta in is still there. Even though the Heartland building is not, the garden is, with yours and Michael's daughter's placentas.
That's right. That's right.
Providing nutrition. Okay.
Yes.
So, again, love you. Mom. Great to see you.
Thanks, Jason.
Thank you.
Are back. What we just listened to was the choice of our next guest, Tom Clark, familiar to many of you. The music was from Freddie Redd and Hamp Haas, Lady J Blues, a lovely piano instrumental. Hey, Tom, good to see you back.
Hey, comrades.
Hi, Tom.
Good to see you, brothers and sister.
Look at you in front of all those books. You overly read dude.
We're clearing out the books, making ready for some renovations next year, and it's quite a trip down memory lane. It's a combination of stuff read and oh my gosh, I forgot to read this. So but I've given away 4 boxes of books just this week, and put 2 more in the basement that'll go on the new shelves sometime next year. So it's nice.
It's coming along.
Yeah.
Well, for those of you who never heard this story, given that Tom's a guest today, I get to say Tom and I have known each other since we were in high school. And what brought us together was working on anti-racism efforts through something called Young Christian Students. When our previous guest, Jason McNeil Graham, referred to whenever 3 or more are gathered, it was great to hear him reference that particular piece from the Bible, from New Testament, because I had my key one was the mystical body of Christ. That phrase got me and kept me going throughout, even to now. So Tom, you were, when I first met you, in the seminary, and as my father said to all of us Queen of Peace girls who dated various seminarians, because they were the only white guys who took anti-racism seriously. Okay. My father accused us all of messing up vocations.
Yeah.
Interrupting people's call. All I want to say about go ahead.
Mother Macaulay and Queen of Peace gal certainly did mess up a bunch of us who are on the journey and seminary journey, but they were heady years. I mean, we called them human relations days, if you
Right.
recall.
When
And
we
what was a bigger deal at Quigley North is that we brought women on campus on a Saturday when normally we were in school in class because they
Right.
didn't want us in sock hops Friday night. So we had Thursdays off and went to school on Saturday.
Yeah.
So we turned some of those into human relations days. And, you know, rest, as they say, is history.
So you became a newsman of a certain kind of, a different kind of newsman, a guy paying attention to journalism who was not exactly a reporter, but maybe reporting on reporters and more often reporting on ideas that the reporters weren't covering, which led to you starting the amazing community media workshop that had a long life and a lot of service to the community. Now retired-ish, where do you find news these days, and what do you think are the better sources that we do have, given the strange media landscape that we've moved into in the last
It is a
while?
strange media landscape. It is rife with many opportunities, but many changes and many diminished newsrooms. My life's work out of Columbia College was often trying to get that third source into a news story. People on the ground, unofficial sources, we would call them,
Right.
because that's where really good stories came from. And of course, they weren't as refined and polished voices sometimes, but nonetheless, real lived experience. And that to me is what interests me in journalism, and today it's what I look for. We've actually been through an interesting household exercise, blending two generations of media consumers. And part of this is to save money because we found that we have something like $558.75 a month going out from these 3-adult household in various forms of print. We used to call it print, online and social media platforms, both the wires that we use to get that to us and everything else. And we want to cut back on some of that. Mind you, we don't have cable TV, but we have streaming services now. And that's probably the biggest change, is winning our way through all that. So we actually still get newsprint, the Sun-Times and the Tribune every morning, although we spend less time with them. And I rely very much every day on the Washington Post and the New York Times online, as well as Block Club News, WBEZ. I pay for Cranes, as other people might pay for the Wall Street Journal, for instance. Those aren't exactly the same, but it's original, reputable reporting that covers some sides of a story. And it's important to know what side might be getting covered by those different outlets. But it's a pretty rich mix that is augmented by a couple of mainstay monthlies or weeklies like the New Yorker and the Sun, which I know Katie and I both have enjoyed, and Michael, for years. The Sun is one of those monthlies I've never given up and still will tend to read cover to cover within the first week of getting it. A refreshing change of pace that's part of the news.
Well, it is and it isn't. I mean, it's this creative writing, and they call it, they call it personal writing, as well as the photography that they feature. But back to news and getting it, you coined the phrase in my mind of nonprofit news. And we started covering it together on this program, I don't know, 12, 13 years ago. And so when you refer to that, something else you call kitchen table blogs, what are we talking about there? And what do you like the most out of what's available to us here in Chicago of that?
Well, one of the things the internet has done, quite frankly, is undervalued traditional journalism, which had its shortcomings. But to the extent the Tribune or the Sun-Times or other so-called mainstream media was a sort of public square, that public square is more diffused and a little harder to keep track of. Question, I'm sorry, I'm already drifting off on the media landscape here a little bit. Nonprofit
Table
news,
blogs.
on the one hand, it's just a tax status, but it's referred to generally these days because as legacy newsrooms like the Tribune shrink, other smaller news outlets have picked up some of the slack. In Chicagoland, Blood News is probably the best example of that. It grew like a phoenix out of the ashes of a millionaire-supported DNA info. It supplied a local, very hyper-local news, neighborhood by neighborhood, with beat reporters who kept track of both the police blotter and new restaurants opening and whatnot. And when their New York millionaire decided to move on to his next hobby, DNA info disappeared, but Block Club News was organized by the former reporters and editors as a nonprofit, and its news gathering is now supported by members and baseball caps and other promotions and stuff. It's an interesting mix of funding that our public radio station has kind of pioneered in terms of their pledge drives and membership support. They actually, public radio receives very, very little public money other than what is freely given by individuals and some foundations. It's public to the extent that it is trying to serve a public need, but it is not public in terms of government support. What has been happening as big newsrooms shrink is that some foundations and some journalists have been organizing how we collect and distribute news in a different way. And in Chicago, we've been documenting this for about 10 years now, and it's a very rich but ever-changing environment and very hard to keep track of until you find kind of your own best. So Block Club News is one of those, certainly in terms of hyper-local news, but I still pick up the reader, or at least look at it online, because it too has long form contextual reporting on not just arts and culture, but a lot of other issues, and very strong columnists and always up and coming young journalists. But I want to quickly mention in this nonprofit news arena, Southside Weekly, the City Bureau that comes out of the Invisible Institute, the Tribe. These are all other community-oriented, often trying to fill gaps in the news coverage that the mainstream media had either given up or never really did a very good job doing. What's most intriguing on this front, before we get too far into the business here, is this new announcement of the Chicago Public Media, or public radio in town, seeking to buy the Chicago Sun-Times. This could be a fascinating merger of two journalistic heavyweights using very different platforms. But there's also some concern that they may end up attracting most of the nonprofit dollars that are out there, and some of these other sites may end up suffering from a smaller pool. It'll be interesting to see what happens. But
Tom, let me ask you about the Chicago Reporter. For 50 years of faith-based Friends of Chicago, what's going on? I know there's some dynamics and some questioning about its future.
Well, about a year ago, the award-winning Chicago Reporter went on hiatus. Its sponsoring organization, the Community Renewal Society, is retooling. They spent a year trying to figure out what they want to do next with this precious product. In the meantime, there have been nothing much more than kind of a newsletter of opinions and not much repertorial oomph at a time when the city is maybe coming to reckon with its segregated past. We don't have the heralded award-winning journal looking at matters of race, class, and equity in the in-depth way that the Reporter did for almost 50 years now. And so Friends of the Chicago Reporter has formed to try to, at the very least, document that 50-year history, explain what we mean by data-driven independent investigative journalism, and point out the need to continue this precious resource, which had over 30,000 social media followers a year ago, who've not been served up really much of anything for a year.
How do you see the city coming into a reckoning with our racial past? I mean, I know that I, along with you, paid close attention to the Chicago Reporter for, 40 years or more. It was a huge plus for those of us interested in anti-racism work in the city. How do you currently see the city coming into a reckoning, the one you just referred to? Just briefly, because.
Well, I'm afraid some of the divisions we have in our city reflect the national trend where more and more our individual fears are weaponized and we end up in our own corners, sort of yelling past the center, past the public square, and not really hearing each other anymore.
Yeah.
Coming to grips with our racial disparities in the past, from the Laquan McDonald murder forward, I think has been an ongoing struggle through the Black Lives Matters and other street protests, as well as what's been going on around police reform and the struggles to have a federal consent decree matched by any kind of real progress by either the city or the current leadership of the police department has been a real challenge. And it's in the midst of that, I think we're trying to figure out how, even as we celebrate the 150-year celebration of the Great Chicago Fire and the rebuilding of Chicago, it's a great time to come to grips with how housing covenants became even more secured as a way of keeping us apart in the rebuilding of the city. I mean, that's when that stuff started. It's why we had the 1919 riots, because of the way the housing covenants had kept us separated instead of working as a metropolis that really was working together. So I think at a time when, just looking at things politically, we have a lieutenant governor who's African-American, an attorney general who's African-American, the president of the Cook County Democratic Party who's African-American, the president of the county board, the mayor, the state's attorney. We still have this ongoing undercurrent of whether these are the right people to be running stuff, and fears by others about whether the city's headed in the right direction, such that billionaires can spout off about our, like Afghanistan.
Because of Jimmy Carter, whenever Jimmy Carter sort of enters the news, and his birthday was recently, and a lot of folks are, he's kind of the sainted Jimmy Carter at this point, isn't he? You have in your photographer, putting your photographer hat on, you took kind of an iconic photo, which then popped up, once Jimmy Carter's name gets brought up, that you took in your own whole old neighborhood of Uptown, featured Jimmy Carter and Mayor Harold Washington in front of a Voice of the People, I think, building. I mean, one of the greatest parts of that photo, other than the absolute joy that they're laughing, and Rosalind Carter's in it too, but above there's on the second story window is this person's face, a young person's face, leaning on their arm, kind of watching the whole scenario. Talk about that photo and what it meant to you. I think you just got into something with Jurafsky about it, but whatever you want to say, we've got a couple minutes left.
It's
I appreciate your. It's certainly one of my more famous photos, and the response this time around has been intriguing, because I do think people are looking for a Jimmy Carter-esque hero, if you will, or leader who they feel they can relate to better than some of our existing leadership. That was an interesting Saturday morning in Uptown. It was a Habitat for Humanity groundbreaking. We knew the owner, Ann Harper. I had found out about this press conference purely by chance. I'm in a press pool. I'm alongside leading photographers in town from the Sun-Times and the Tribune and the AP, and they all had pictures of this the next day because it was a big deal for Jimmy Carter to have come to town. And of course, the mayor, Harold Washington, was leading everyone around. I knew some of the folks. I knew a lot of people on the podium. I don't want to suggest they were smiling at me. there was some comment that Jimmy Carter had just made that just cracked Harold up.
Yeah.
And so a number of sort of caught part of that moment, but no one had the second story the way I did. And to my mind, this sort of nonchalant, bored, stoic daughter of a tenant
Right.
really summed up what a lot of folks in Uptown felt about all these dignitaries in this one-shot press conference that morning. Well, thanks for noticing us, but you know, what about the rest of the week
Right.
and what
Right.
we have to do to survive here? I mean, it just, it was wonderful to capture it. It was one of those things where I knew I had a good shot, but I couldn't believe it when I got back in the dark room. It's actually a fairly heavily dodged and burned in print because of the nature of the lighting that day and the very, very white-faced Jimmy right next door to Harold. There was a lot of dodging and stuff I had to do to bring everything out, including keeping that young lady up on the second floor in focus.
Yeah.
Thanks for bringing it up. It
No,
was a
really
great
well
moment.
done. Really well done, Tom. And
And what a
hangs in
story
my,
from Rams this week about the backdrop of what was going on in that story too.
I've got it hanging in my house. It's one of my favorite pictures ever.
you know, now you've got the experience of being on our Zoom show as a guest.
How about that?
I know, and we've run out of time because that's the way that happens when we have two guests. Can we call on you again, even though I know you're going to enter into a building phase at some point next spring?
Absolutely. We
Okay,
hardly touched on neighborhood politics. at
I
all.
know, I
We'll
know.
need
We have
you,
to come
Tom.
back to that.
We welcome you coming back to visit every now and then, and we certainly will need your comments.
Yeah, absolutely, as ever. Thanks for sharing some time this morning, and we'll do part two, maybe around petition gathering time when
There we go.
we're both doing our notary thing.
And we'll see you on your front
Absolutely.
porch soon.
Absolutely.
Indeed.
Take care, guys.
Peace
Bye-bye.
out.
Have a great weekend.
You too.
Hace rato no te veo, tengo tiempo pensando en ti. Hay tanto por contarte, no sé por dónde empezar. He tenido mis amores y nadado en el blanco. Me he perdido y me he encontrado explorando paraísos. Me muero por estar a tu lado. Quisiera poder.
Okay, so that was fun talking to Tom as a guest. As far as events go, tomorrow is a big day in Chicago, and it brings back memories for Michael and I, who both ran in the very first Chicago Marathon back in 1977, I think it was. I didn't finish, but Michael did on that one because I had never run more than 15 miles. And once I got to the 20-mile mark, and I decided, well, maybe I should just walk while I drink water this time. And taking the first walking steps, I almost fell over, and the marshals sat me down, wrapped my knees in ice bags, wrapped those in ace bandages. And I was so out of it, I could just look down and say, well, that's going to make running really hard. And they said, oh, honey, you're done today. But didn't Michael continue? And I remember sitting in the truck waiting for him to finish, which he did, God love him. And later I did finish 3 marathons in different places, but we just, it's fun to watch. So if you're out and it's supposed to be a beautiful day tomorrow, inspiring to watch all these people run, might even inspire you to get your running shoes on And we want to shout out to Michael.
I want to do a special shout out, not only to all the runners, but to my son-in-law, Dimitri Doden, who's in from New York, and he's running on probably his third or fourth marathon, maybe not that many, but I'm sure he'll do well. And on the sports front, the beloved White Sox are being tested down there in Texas, down in Houston. They play this afternoon. We are recording on Friday. They'll also be back in Chicago for the third game, and that will be at Comiskey Park. Now I call it Sox Park. It's got a bunch of new names. And another thing to really take note of on the sports front is the current upheaval, let's call it a reckoning, in the National Women's Soccer League, where games were halted last weekend over accusations that coaches abused players, team executives didn't pay attention, and the league failed to protect its most important asset, the athletes.
Incredible, incredible. So in closing, we will go out with Our World by Twin Peaks, as we normally do. For over 25 years, we have brought you live from the Heartland, now called Heartland at Home. We broadcast every Saturday morning, 9 o'clock Central on Chicago's WLUW 88.7 FM, also streaming live from WLUW.org and archived on our channel at youtube.com/heartlandmedia. We are also now on Spotify and Google Podcasts. You type in Live from the Heartland. So thanks to our entire crew, our little crew, Luis Mejia Aarons and Lynn Orman Weiss. We want you to do good in the world.
Because the world needs all the good that we do.
All
All
power
power to the
to the
people.
people.